Welcome back, everyone. Another Suibhne video. This is the animated history of Australia, a place that's maybe not that deep in history. Maybe not like Italy or Germany, but still holds history itself. I think we're going to learn a lot today. We're going to have the Aborigine, we're going to have the colonialism, and we'll have modern Australia, and maybe some new things that we didn't know. Let's learn together.
This episode is brought to you by Skillshare. The first 500 viewers who sign up using the link below get 2 months of Skillshare absolutely free.
Bet.
Aristotle, Ptolemy, and Macrobius believed that there was far too much land in the northern hemisphere.
So we're already going to be talking about the Australis, or Australia. There's a version of that in Latin. It's supposed to be known as the southernmost continent. So if we knew what Antarctica was at the time, let's just say in year 1, right? In year 1 AD, if we knew Antarctica was there and we had proof cartographically, proof of that, that would actually be called Australia, because Australia typically means southernmost continent, if I'm not mistaken.
And that there must be some undiscovered continent balancing the globe somewhere in the south. Okay, so the logic was a little flawed, but during the Age of Discovery, the search was on for Terra Australis Incognita.
Here we go.
Fast forward a few centuries to the East Indies. 3 Dutch sailors landed in Australia accidentally in the 1600s. The mythical southern continent had just been found.
Insane. And it's not like a small island. This thing's huge. That's why it's a continent. Some people are going to be like, it's not a continent. Well, in the United States, it's a continent, okay? Just like in the United States, we use the imperial system, so can't argue with me. Greatest intro, or one of the greatest intros on YouTube.
Australia was the last of the New World to be discovered, because let's be honest, nobody cares about Antarctica.
I care.
Australia was of course already inhabited. Indigenous Australians, also known as, had a population of between 300 and 700,000 by modern estimates. Early contacts with these tribes were as often peaceful as they were violent. It is thought that these groups arrived in 2 stages. The first was from the Indian subcontinent via a land bridge that connected Australia to the island of New Guinea.
Isn't that the only, time? Or are we also going to talk about, Polynesian sailors?
Bringing with them the Pama-Nyungan language family. The second wave was much later and may have been groups related to the Austronesians of Indonesia.
Ah, okay, so different versions of that. Interesting, and we have a little graph here of the different peoples. Interesting. Is there anything notable about these peoples that I should know?
Their culture and history was preserved through the oral tradition.
Let's actually, literally spend some time here and try to pronounce each one. I think it'll be fun and entertaining watching me fail. You got the Nagara, the Katu, the Nunyar. I'm going to imagine the Y is silent. Murning, Wati, Wanman, Wararsa, Arnham, Marindi, Gara, Yapa, Gulpin, Arandi, Yuri, Tura, Karnik, Myopic, Paman, Maran, Wakakabik, Wiradhuri, Hakanti, Yu, Gulen, and Ewan. That wasn't that bad.
The Dutch named the island New Holland after the county of Holland in the Netherlands, but it wasn't until the British landed on the east coast and named it New South Wales that Europeans began to settle.
Such an arbitrary line, as always, Europeans.
Landing in Port Jackson on the 26th of January 1788, hey, that's today, the so-called First Fleet arrived to found the colony of Sydney, with the intention of using the labour of prisoners to achieve wealth for Britain. However, contrary to Australia's convict founding myth, less than half of this First Fleet were actually convicts. In the 1800s, Australia was circumnavigated, mapped, and new colonies started springing up all over. Hobart, Newcastle, Launceston, Port Macquarie, Brisbane, and Melbourne, with dozens of penal centres.
So, yeah, originally this was where you send your criminals to. It's kind of interesting because it'd been crazy if Napoleon got sent here. I wish Napoleon got sent here versus St. Helena. It would make more sense. It's way more far away. I guess it would just be too risky because it's not as easy to watch him.
Adelaide and Perth were founded as free settlement cities, but the latter was made into a penal colony after it failed to grow naturally. As the Europeans expanded, the frontier wars began with the Aboriginals, many of whom were hostile to the foreign invaders. Most famously, the Black War of Tasmania, which
I wonder if this is similar for you guys that know the history better than I do. This is very similar to like the Zulu encounters.
Hostile to the foreign invaders. Most famously, the Black War of Tasmania, which nearly wiped out the indigenous Tasmanians. But far more destructive to the Aboriginals was smallpox, which killed tens of thousands.
Yeah.
Australia's growth would stagnate until the 1850s gold rush, which
Wait, what did he say?
of thousands. Australia's growth would stagnate
Technically, New Zealand was part of New South Wales. Oh, wow.
until the 1850s gold rush, which drew hundreds and thousands of settlers from all around the world in search for wealth, particularly in New South Wales and what would become Victoria. This would forever change Australia's character, with new free settlers overshadowing its convict past, bringing with them their ideas of European Enlightenment, the American self-determinism, and the Chinese hatred for the British. These gold diggers became discontent with the corrupt and badly run colonial elites and rose up in rebellion in the infamous Eureka Stockade. These settlers were beginning to feel a sense of nationalism, that perhaps Australia could be something different. The winds of change were on Terra Australis, and soon large-scale trade unions developed in Australia's largely working-class population from the ideas of orthodox Marxists. Trade unions still hold a significant influence over Australian politics today.
Really?
But let's not forget the rift that had been forming between Australia and Australians, the government and its people. Thousands of ex-convicts were being released each year, most of them turning to civil jobs, but a sizable minority turned to Australia's bushy frontier for freedom and profits. Policing was harsh, but order couldn't reach far enough. Outside of the cities, only personal gain and wealth could drive law enforcement.
So you have the outback, which is like the majority of the territory in Australia, basically becoming a frontier life for so many. And I bet you to this day, there's a ton of people that live that way, right?
Money would change hands and lips were sealed. In this climate, an Australian icon was born, Ned Kelly. Famous for his tin hat Robin Hood thievery, infamous for his cop killing and town raids, and recognisable everywhere for that nifty bulletproof suit.
So was he like a knight?
For more on one of the most well-known cornerstones of Australian folklore, go to my channel, Feature History, and check out my video on Old Ned.
Feature history, we'll have to check that out.
Okay, so besides bulletproof suits or whatever, most Aussie colonies were granted self-governing status and united to form the Commonwealth of Australia in 1901.
Melbourne and Sydney couldn't agree who would be the capital, so Canberra, which was also, sorry, I'm reading like I'm so slow, sorry. Canberra, which was about halfway between, was selected instead, so it was a compromise. Okay, that's interesting, I didn't know that.
Dominion of the British Crown. The new Australian government was very quick to open up a new dark chapter in Aboriginal history, the infamous Stolen Generation. Beginning in 1905, the government began rounding up half-castes, a term which is now highly offensive, and settled them into white families with the intention.
If you don't get the reference, I highly recommend the film Rabbit Proof Fence. Interesting. We have to dig into this.
Of breeding out their Aboriginal blood in a form of cultural genocide.
That's horrible.
Abuses of these children were also rampant, which is a rather depressing segue into the White Australia policy, a set of strict settlement acts which restricted immigration from anyone who wasn't British or Northern European up until about the Second World War.
Jeez.
As a British colony, Australia would unilaterally declare war on Germany during the First World War, forming the Australia and New Zealand Army Corps, or ANZACs. The young nation was sent headfirst into war. Around 500,000 soldiers volunteered, or nearly 1/10 of the total population. The baptism of fire came during the Gallipoli campaign, when more than 8,000 men lost their lives in the failed invasion of Turkey, an event etched into the memory of the Australian zeitgeist. Although crippled from the Great Depression, Australia again took up arms in 1939 to support her mother nation in the Second World War, this time fighting in Europe, North Africa, the Pacific, and South Asia.
Yeah, Pacifics, look how close they got, by the way. That's an interesting thing right here. Like specific like Indonesia and part of Papua New Guinea, you have so many islands here on Japanese island hopping campaign. You can imagine there's some Japanese submarines just lurking in these waters. Think about being in Australia, how close that is.
Prisoners of war in Malaya, Burma, and Thailand were treated inhumanely by the Japanese, who also bombed Australia's northern
Really? I didn't know that. What?
coast about 100 times. Australia is still a very young nation, but it has emerged a very powerful force in the region, now a beacon of democracy, social progressivism, and commerce, with its phenomenal urbanization consistently ranked among the world's most livable cities. Walking the line between left and right with generous social programs, universal suffrage, a welcoming immigration policy, and attractive business prospects. This is John. John wants to learn how to play the didgeridoo.
So that's Skillshare. So this is a very small video compared to our other Sweeney videos, but Australia is one of those countries that are so new, the history depth feels light. But that can't just be the case, right? There's still... When did Australia unify? Was it 1905? I know we have all that. So
Dominion of the
1901, right? So there's still 124 years of history of Australia. But prior to that, you have at least... We're not going to count anything prior to the colonialism quite yet. Around the 1600s, you have between that and 1901 of like colonialism. And then even before that, we have the Aborigine. And real quick, as we end this video, which is mainly, of course, talking about Australia, I want to find a way on YouTube to really learn and talk about and react to a lot of these native tribes, not just Aborigines, but even like First Nations of Canada, Native Americans of America, so forth, in any of these nations. I feel like that history is lost to time, and it's hard to pick up the pieces unless we're talking strictly archaeologically. But I definitely want to find a place for that conversation. But we definitely need to talk about the Aborigine in the future. We definitely need to talk about colonial Australia in the future, New Holland, South Wales. And most importantly, we got to talk about Australia more. And also her neighbor, New Zealand. If you live in Australia, tell me, hey, tell me some interesting facts. Give me some videos to watch. I'm so interested in learning about your history. I'll see you guys next time. Peace out, and bye-bye.